Netflix's most popular shows right now is Griselda. And it's a true life story about the godmother of that white gold and also known as the Black Widow. So if you don't know the story about Griselda, I highly recommend you check out the series. I'll give you a little brief description. She was basically a real life narco who had a net worth of over $80 million per year when she was at the height of her career. It is believed that her net worth even reached up to $2 billion, which was more than Al Capone's. But the way she wasn't receiving her money was basically not in the best interest to her and the people in her community and even her children. As one might say, she was living that street life and actually was responsible for a lot of crime and even received a sentence from a couple, I believe, murders. But she started off as a mom of 3 boys, and then she propelled to be this huge lady of slanging and selling. But she also had a lot of conflict, and I believe that there was a lot of energy of paranoia, creating the demise for others and basically her overall demise at the end of the story, and being locked up in jail and just creating a lot of havoc. So even though she was a glamorized kingpin, she was definitely not a nice person, or at least to the public, right? She was not a nice person. To anybody who got in her way, she was not a nice person. And some of her life choices are definitely very questionable. So let's take a look at her birth chart. So first of all, I want to say that it's interesting that this series is coming out in the height of Aquarius season because Griselda is an Aquarius. She was born on February 15th, 1943 in Colombia. And some people really think that Aquarius zodiacs can be very detached at times and really have that energy where it might seem very selfish, where it's really all about them. And another thing about Aquarius is that sometimes gives them a bad rap is that they are a fixed sign, so they're not necessarily going to change their ways for anybody. Another thing that stands out when I think about Aquarius is, and especially with her, is that she has that overall influence with the collective, with the community, whoever her collective and community was. So I'm not surprised she became a very dominant leader, even if it was slanging. She also has a moon in Cancer, which lets me know that she's possibly at times overly emotional, that emotional energy. And the Cancer is seen as very intuitive, is also known as the mother sign. And she did have 3 boys who basically lost their lives from being in this lifestyle. And they grew up in this lifestyle, and I'm sure they had a lot of areas of conflict, but overall, this lifestyle is what brought her and her sons to their demise. And with the moon in Cancer, in all honesty, it can be very shadowy. We have to remember there's many phases of the moon. So I believe she was, in her way, like a good mom, but then in other ways, she was a very bad mom. But then again, we are on the outside looking in. So what was happening, we can't really say, but we can say that her overall motherly nature is what brought her down to her shadowy past. Another thing that I want to point out in her chart is that she has a Mars in Capricorn, which is very interesting because right now we have a Mars in Capricorn as well at this current time. A Mars in Capricorn can be very ambitious. It could also be very aggressive, and it could be very dark at times, and it can also have a very mean nature, wanting everything, wanting that whatever you could take, whatever you can get. And it's almost like the greed didn't know when to stop. And you see that a lot with having a fire energy with Capricorn, especially a Mars in Capricorn. Not only did she have a Mars in Capricorn, but she also had her Mercury in Capricorn as well. And when I think about a Mercury in Capricorn, that lets me know that she was able to communicate her message, even though the message may have been very wrong, but she was able to communicate it quite well, especially it being around centered in business. So people understood what she was talking about. And they had that trust with her because she was able to communicate certain things quite well, especially when it came to getting money, receiving money, and making people feel justified in the way they got their money. She also had her Jupiter in Cancer along with her moon. So this kind of stand out. I'm not surprised she had 4 kids. Three of them did, passed away from the lifestyle, but the other ones, survived and is still alive. But for the most part, this Jupiter in Cancer energy shows me that she was able to create an area of abundance, especially around the emotional state of being a mother. Like maybe in the beginning, she thought she was really doing it for the survival of the children, but then later as it continued, it never stopped, right? It never fully came to like, okay, the expansion is done. And that's something that also has to do with the Mars in Capricorn, because her Mars is in a direct opposition of her Jupiter in Cancer, which is creating that dynamic of, while she knows what she is doing has like a good cause in the beginning, but then towards the end, it is ultimately bringing her completely down, especially in the feminine energy. It's a balance. We got to have that masculine, but then also we have to have that feminine. And you can only expand so much. But when that spontaneous energy of always wanting more, you just can't get a hold of it. And doing vicious things such as war, dealing, fighting, shooting, blah, blah. It really is a destructive pattern. And that expansion, even though it comes to a complete halt at an area where it's not beneficial. She also has a Venus in Pisces, which I think when we saw a softer side of her, or when people saw a softer side of her, it was that Venus in Pisces energy, but also Venus controls that area of drugs, relationship, and also that spiritual essence that can also the spiritual essence that can also lead to the ego state. So the higher self can only get so high until it is kind of at a place where it kind of becomes cult-like. I'm just saying. And with her, it wasn't necessarily a higher self energy. It was more of an ego-driven energy. And we also see that because she has a huge Leo stellium. And I'm not saying that all Leos have a big ego. I'm just saying that that leadership really stands out with the Leos. So she had her Pluto in Leo, her Chiron in Leo, and her North Node in Leo. And I think that Pluto in Leo, the demise of the leader, that energy of healing from the wounded healer of Chiron, her leadership created, and the North Node of her current state of that lifetime, what she was here to do. Also, her Uranus and her Saturn are both in Gemini. So that's a lot of masculine energy right there. It almost feels like boundless. It almost feels limitless, but with being in Gemini, but in all honesty, the restrictions come to the hold, especially with that area of communication. And we also have to remember that the Gemini is also centered around Mercury as well, in that area of like causing medical injuries to people. It feels like rebellious as well, especially with the Uranus. To me, if you were to ask me what I thought her rising sign would, I would say it is a close tie between a Gemini and possibly a Leo. I definitely feel like it has to be another masculine energy. She was also a life path of 7, so she was a good teacher for the people who are learning to slang and smuggle. Very interesting woman, successful in her career, that happened to be very destructive in the overall end. Definitely check out the Netflix show, Griselda.